Discussing my book, my recent book, what it is about, and a little bit about who I am and why would anyone listen to me. And then we'll get into some of the cool topics of the book, such as Bayesian reasoning and Jesus mythicism, the idea that maybe Jesus didn't exist as a historical person. And then we can finally get into, I guess, the bulk of the talk about William Lane Craig. Everyone familiar with Dr. Craig and his self-guidance? Some people? Okay. For those that know that he's really, really cool, has great arguments for God's existence. So, hopefully you don't mind having a laugh as well, because there might be some funny bits. But we'll get through Craig's arguments, and hopefully it's an interactive session. If you want to ask questions, I'm happy to take questions. I've definitely got to get used to that. I'm going to debate Craig one day anyway. But especially during the discussion on Craig's arguments, I want to involve all of you as well, get your ideas. Partly just because it's a good idea to have interaction with the audience, partly because I'm clever and I'm going to get all your best ideas and put it in the next book. That's good. Alright, here we go. So first we'll have a little bit of a chat about the book, what's in it, what's it all about, how's it been going. Then we'll talk a little bit about Jesus mythicism, which is why a lot of people are interested in the book and my research, even though I kind of don't go that way too much. Then a little bit of talk on Bayesian reasoning. Is everyone familiar with Bayes' theorem? Yeah. Maybe exposed to Richard Carrier and how Bayes' theorem should be used in history. So we'll talk about that. It's a funny-looking mathematical formula that's probably useful for just about everything, including history and biblical studies. Then we'll have our discussion of William Lane Craig, and really at any time you can ask me some questions. Alright, so who am I? Who the heck is this guy? I used to be a fundamentalist Christian, and now I'm a scholar. I'm in the Studies in Religion department at Sydney University. I've just finished my Masters and started a PhD. The Masters was on Jesus' 8 historical theories. I made a sincere career move. This is definitely not something I did because I thought, Richard Dawkins made millions of dollars, I think I'll do that. I earn minimum wage, and I used to be on 6-figure income. I gave up careers as doctor, pharmacist, financial planner, etc. So I could earn minimum wage. Now, one thing that really got me into this are the evidentialist arguments for Christianity. I was really amazed by these arguments, particularly William Lane Craig. The case for Christianity is a lot more sophisticated than it used to be. It's no longer just the Bible says it, it's true, I believe it. The guys nowadays involved in it, or mostly the guys, come up with these philosophical arguments. They use scientific evidence, they use historical evidence. It's a lot more sophisticated. So that got me into it because despite that, I think the arguments are still no good. And yeah, hopefully one of my aims is to engage with Lane Craig in a public debate one day. I think that would be really cool. Alright, so what's the book all about? It's just about the evidence. Some of you might be disappointed. I don't know what your opinions are with regards to atheism and how you should approach that, but it's only about the evidence. It's not a commentary on whether faith is good or not. It's not a commentary on whether Christianity is good for the world or not. It's just about the evidence. We can discuss all that other stuff another time.
Sorry, Mike, can you just talk a bit louder?
Yes, sorry. Okay, why I wrote the book. As you can see, there's a black hole there. Take that as you will. But I thought there was a bit of a black hole in the atheistic literature when it came to these sophisticated arguments for God's existence and for Jesus, the biblical Jesus, the historical Jesus. There's some really good technical work in the scholarly world. These books are massive, they're really expensive, most people can't read them. I thought we need a popular version of this, and that's basically why I wrote the book. It's less than 200 pages, hopefully very simple to grasp, covers a lot of topics, and it's respectful. It's respectful to religious people, it's respectful to Christians. As I said, it doesn't make any comment on whether Christianity is good or bad for the world. And the overall message of the whole book is actually religious tolerance. I'm not saying you shouldn't or can't be religious. I'm all about doubt. that wasn't meant to rhyme. But yeah, I'm all about the doubt. I'm all about spreading uncertainty, which I don't know if that's a good thing or not. But I think that gives humility. I think it's very important, especially for religious people, to understand that there isn't any real good evidence for any particular religion, and therefore we should respect other people's religious and non-religious views. So if you get to the conclusion, you'll see it's all about religious tolerance at the end. Okay, that's the Amazon. It's been doing pretty good on Amazon. It was #1 for religious philosophy, 2 for atheism, behind one person. There's this one author, you may have heard of him, His Holiness Richard Dawkins, the first of his name. He's just released another book, so that went right in between, bumped me to 3rd. So it's been doing pretty good. I haven't had any publicity, as I said. This is it, Sydney Atheists. This is it, the first bit of publicity for the book. Okay, now that you have a bit of an idea what's in the book, we can quickly cover the Jesus myth theory for people that don't really know what it's all about. There's basically 3 views of Jesus. There's actually dozens or hundreds of views of Jesus, but you can lump them all together into 3 main categories. One being the biblical super Jesus. This is the guy that walked on water, was raised from the dead, turned water into wine, all that sort of stuff. All critical scholars and most rational people reject this view of Jesus, but this is the traditional Jesus that most Christians believe in. Then there's the so-called historical Jesus, and as you can see by the picture, he's not white. And the funny thing is, the historical Jesus, we only know from sources. Does everyone know the sources that argue for the historical Jesus? How we get to know the historical Jesus, how critical scholars, biblical scholars get to know it.
The cloth they found?
Oh, the Shroud of Turin? No, that's probably a forgery.
Gospels.
The Gospels, right. So the funny thing about the historical Jesus is that the sources for this guy, historical Jesus, are exactly the same as the sources for this guy, who's a fiction. So that's interesting. We'll get into that a bit more. And the third view of Jesus is a very fringe minority view. That is that there absolutely was no Jesus at all, not a historical Jesus that the whole story was based on. And I guess this is getting more acceptance. My thesis, my master's thesis, was on these sort of theories, and I think it is the first time a top university has accepted such a thesis. So that was pretty good. And I don't think it's a crazy idea. I don't dogmatically assert that there was no Jesus, but I think that scholars who assert there definitely was one, scholars who think that Jesus mythicists, those that think there was no Jesus, I think they're a bit exaggerating things a little bit, because I don't think it is crazy, and we'll discuss that a little bit. The sources for Jesus are really bad. There's nothing that's contemporary. As I said, they're all basically the same sources as for the fictional Jesus. They're obviously fictional sources. Biblical scholars tend not to use that word, but I'm happy to use that word. These are works of fiction. Basically, biblical scholars go through these works of fiction, take out the bits they don't like, and what we've got left over is the truth that actually happened. That doesn't strike me as good historical methodology. That's a very crude way of putting it, but that's basically what they do. I think I described in the book as the historical Jesus scholars, in formulating their view of the historical Jesus, basically just take the biblical Jesus and take out all the bits that make Jesus Jesus. And yeah, doesn't seem like a very critical thing to do. Now, the funny thing is, Jesus Mythicism, as I said, the book is, I think, as popular as it is because of tackling the issue of Jesus mythicism, but it's really not all that relevant to justifying atheism or justifying why one isn't a Christian. It is a very fringe view, so it can be very difficult to bring that up with people. You might end up looking like a loony. All we need to do is argue, if you want to justify why you're an atheist, why you're not a Christian, all you need to do is argue that this guy is a fiction, the biblical Jesus. You really don't need to talk about the historical Jesus and how the sources are so bad. But I found it to be an interesting theory anyway, and wanted to look into it. So yes, it is a very controversial controversial topic, Jesus mythicism, the idea that Jesus is a complete myth. And there's only a handful of people that really talk about it. Are you aware with them of who they are? Price, yeah, he's great. Richard Carrier, Acharya S. Now these people are basically completely put down by their fellow scholars for a number of reasons. And it's a lot of ad hominem stuff. The scholars tend not to engage with their arguments so much. They focus on these really tangential issues. Maybe they had a minor mistake somewhere. They focus on things that aren't relevant at all. Criticisms of Price and Carrier often revolve around how they don't have jobs in academia, which is understandable. It's kind of hard to get a job in a Christian-dominated field when you're not a Christian and when you're arguing that Jesus didn't exist. It's really tough. Yeah, it's really hard to convince someone of another view when their salary is dependent on that view as well. Are you aware of Mike Licona? He's one of the popular Christian evangelical apologists. Mike Licona lost his job for suggesting that maybe the verse in the Gospel of Matthew about the Jerusalem night of zombies, are you aware of that? When Jesus was resurrected, all the saints came out of their graves, ridiculous scene. Mike Licona suggested maybe that bit of the whole Bible is not true, but the rest of it is all true. He lost his job. Yeah, for showing that tiny bit of critical thought, he lost his job. So that's not good. Acharya S. I think Acharya S gets a lot of flack because she's got one of those, what's it called? A vagina? There it is, V-talk. So we're going really off topic now, but I think there's a lot of sexism in, maybe in academia, maybe in some atheistic groups as well, just as much as you can find in some religious groups, and that's a real shame. I had a little post up on Facebook before saying that if we secular people are going to show the religious that we can be good without God, we really need to be good without God. So the thesis, my master's thesis, which formed the base of the book, faced a few challenges, and you can see a little post on that on the Religious Studies Project website. It's basically for up-and-coming religious scholars to talk about their research. I've got a little post there, Religious Studies Project. And it talks about the challenges I had in even starting the project, because as you can imagine, it's a very fringe view. I didn't even reveal what my conclusions would be. I didn't know what the conclusions would be, but already I faced challenges. They did not want me looking into this. And it didn't help that my supervisor was a Christian as well. But I had another scholar step in and was really supportive, and that person has a vagina too. So I have no problem with people that have vaginas. I like vaginas. Okay, pretty much. So it was finally accepted, had a very good score by a world-class university, so hopefully this is a step in the right direction. And for my PhD, again, I just can't stop with the controversy. I want to look at controversial issues, but it's more mainstream. Basically, my PhD is looking at the evidence for God. So, not so much focusing on Jesus and whether Jesus existed or not, but the evidence for God, which is where William Lane Craig comes into it, and all these other sophisticated apologists. I call them the new theologians. And I again have objections. I had objections in starting this project as well, and that is because of significance. You might think this is strange in a world dominated by believers, but scholars will tell me that this work is insignificant. Why would I engage with the work of William Lane Craig? Obviously his arguments don't work. But of course, it's not obvious to the 55% of the monotheists out there, and various other people. So that was a challenge. I had to couple that with talk on the sociological aspect of Craig and how people find him convincing. Even atheists, some atheists find Craig convincing and convert to Christianity. So I thought, this might be an important topic and important to get into the arguments and show people why they don't exactly work. And I also had objections from continental philosophers. Within philosophy,
Did you understand the objections?
I did. It was basically a prayer. I didn't get it. But for those of you who don't really know about that, there's two big streams of philosophy. You've got the analytic tradition, which is very much British and American based, or at least historically, and you've got the continental tradition, because those philosophers tended to be German and French, at least in the old days. And continental philosophy is really confusing. I don't really have a problem with it, but it's a totally different thing. Analytic philosophy, for me, is where it's at. That's where all these arguments are about. Analytic philosophers are trying to find stuff out. They're trying to figure out, using evidence, trying to find out facts about the world, such as whether God exists. Continental philosophy is a whole other stream. And basically these people, and my fellow religious studies scholars, at least a lot of them, think that it's quite vulgar to look into issues as whether God exists or not. They think it's a vulgar topic, as if people shouldn't be discussing it, which is ridiculous considering how many people believe in God and how many people believe in God because they think the evidence is good. But this is how they feel, and I talk about that a little bit on some of my articles that you can read online. I've got a few posts up now. Yeah, I might be committing career suicide, tackling all these controversial issues, but I make it a point that I want to look at topics that I find interesting and that most people probably find interesting too. I don't think too many people in the general public are interested in Heidegger's opinion of the Kantian critiques of 18th century paganism. You know, who cares, right? So I'm sure stuff like that's interesting to a handful of scholars, but most people, at least when it comes to religion, want to know about God and Jesus. Yeah, you have a question?
Which university, which faculty are you at Notre Dame, for example?
The University of Sydney, Studies in Religion Department.
Sydney studying?
Studies in Religion. So it's sort of, studies in religion is sort of like the secular view of religion, as opposed to theology.
Who's the professor or who?
Excuse me?
Who's the professor or who's the chair?
The chair at the moment is Carol Cusack. Yeah. And I think this PhD is going to be the first refutation of William Lane Craig's case as well, and it's just fun. I think analytic philosophy is fun, getting in there and refuting arguments. It's a lot easier than making your own, that's for sure. Okay, Bayesian reasoning. We'll get to Craig's arguments. It's a scary looking formula. A lot of parts to it. I like breaking it down into English. Bayes' theorem can be tough to use for people that aren't too cluey about maths. I just say Bayesian reasoning, 4 big elements. This is what makes Bayes' reasoning Bayes' reasoning. So the first element is your theory. Now, everyone who has a theory agrees with it. There's no problem there. Basically, what I'm arguing, or what Carrie has argued, a few other people have argued, is that Bayesian reasoning is the way you should approach everything, basically. How you think about everything, how you think about evidence. It's basically a methodology. And everyone's got their theory, of course, and everyone's got the second element, which is the evidence of the theory. Most people that are rational will present some sort of evidence for their theory. Even the average internet conspiracy theorist will refer to some sort of evidence. Whether it's good evidence is a different question. Third and fourth elements of Bayesian reasoning is what makes Bayes Bayes. You've got the consideration, the third element, of all possible theories. It's not just looking at your theory and how the evidence fits it. It's like, wow, it just fits so well, like a lot of biblical theories. You've got to consider other explanations as well. That's what makes it different. And biblical scholars, if you look at this stuff, they don't necessarily do that all the time. And it's also looking at all the evidence. This to me is what really makes Bayes Bayes. It's considering all the knowledge that we have up until this point. That's a lot of evidence to factor in. Yes, question?
Yes, how does that differ to the scientific methodology?
It doesn't really. The cool thing about Bayesian reasoning, and why historians should use it and biblical scholars should use it, is that they arguably already do or should. What historian is gonna say this is nuts? That you should be factoring in other explanations. That you should be factoring in all the available evidence and not just the evidence that directly fits your theory. No one who's rational is going to argue with that. So historians arguably already do this. They just might not know it because they think, I don't do maths. History's not a mathematical subject, but it is. The job of the historian is not to tell us what happened in the past. Now that just sounded really, really weird, but we don't know what happened in the past. The job of the historian is to try and figure out what probably happened in the past. Once you're making probabilistic determinations, which is what historians actually do, you're doing maths. They're not necessarily transparent about it, but they're using terms such as probably, or almost certainly, or most likely not. You can translate that into a number. They're making probabilistic determinations. It's just not obviously mathematical. But when you consider that it's probabilistic, probabilities is math. So we talk a little bit about Bayesian reasoning, how it's probably a better way to look at the evidence for Jesus, whether you're talking about the biblical Jesus or historical Jesus, than what's commonly used by scholars, biblical scholars, which is the criteria of authenticity. These are really, well, a lot of them are really speculative. These are used by biblical scholars. They go through the Bible and they use these criteria to say, okay, this bit is true, this bit's maybe not so true, and that's how they come up with their various views of Jesus. And one of these is the criterion of embarrassment. So, people heard about that one? It's basically arguing that because something in the Bible is embarrassing, it's unlikely that the author made it up, so it just must be true. Yeah, right? Now, these criteria more and more are becoming attacked by biblical scholars themselves. Critical scholars in other fields aren't too impressed by them. I use the example in the book of Harry Potter. I have it on good faith that the author of the Harry Potter books, J.K. Rowling, is a muggle. Now, because she portrays muggles negatively in the early parts of the Harry Potter books, it just must be true that Harry Potter existed. And Harry Potter was actually abused by his uncle, because it's just embarrassing that a muggle would write so negatively about muggles. So, and there's a lot of other criteria like that. There's criteria that even complement each other and contradict each other, which basically allow every word of the Bible to be true. There's the criterion of vividness, which is if something in the Bible is vividly described, it just must be true. There's so much detail. Because fiction is never vivid, right? And then there's the criterion of least distinctiveness. Because something is just quickly mentioned without any detail, that must be true too. It's a simple explanation. So basically everything in the Bible is true. You've also got the criterion of Aramaic context and the criterion of Greek context. Now, because the whole Bible was written in Greek and there's a bit of Aramaic in there, again, you can pretty much argue that the whole Bible is true. That's putting it very crudely, but basically the criteria of authenticity are being attacked by biblical scholars themselves. Very speculative stuff. Okay? Going to move on a little bit. For those that can't see, I've got a picture of Shooter Brown up there. Illogical arguments, ain't nobody got time for that. So we were looking at Craig's cumulative case for God's existence. So he's got, yes?
That's a trivial point. You said that the whole Bible was written in Greek. That is, I think, untrue.
That's right, yeah.
The Old Testament is Hebrew.
Yes, that's right.
And the New Testament was rewritten by Constantine. When Constantine...
I don't know about that, but you're right that the New Testament was written in Greek. You're right.
Yeah, that's all Greek philosophy.
That's true. Okay. So Craig's got, in Craig's debates, for those of you who don't know him, you might want to look him up on YouTube. He's got some pretty interesting debates. The maddening thing is that his atheistic opponents tend to do quite poorly in the debates. Craig's quite famous for beating all the atheists he debates, such as Hitchens. I watched his Hitchens debate. I was pretty disappointed. It seemed like he was really beating Hitchens into submission over whether Hitchens thought God existed or not. That is something I would never concede. It's not relevant to the debate. Atheism is not the belief that there is no God. But he's very good. He's a very good debater. He's a logical philosopher and a very good debater. So that's what piqued my interest in him. And it's a real challenge to go through his arguments and find out what's wrong with them. And we shall start with Craig's contingency argument. Oh, by the way, he usually brings about 5 arguments in his debates. If you go through his books, he's got about 7 that he rotates through. And most of them are actually not his arguments, but he's changed them a little bit, and they're pretty good. Okay, so we've got the contingency argument. Premise 1, everything that exists has an explanation of its existence. Premise 2, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God, obviously. Premise 3, the universe exists. Premise 4, the universe has an explanation of its existence. Conclusion, therefore the explanation of the universe's existence is God. Now, this is the interactive part. I want to know what you think is wrong here.
Does he explain the existence of God?
No.
He just did.
This argument is the proof of God.
Number 2. Read number 2.
This first premise is false.
Yes, that's possible.
I think it's just playing word games with what is explanation.
Yep. A lot of these arguments, a lot of philosophy is playing word games. It's all about the definition. There's a few interesting parts about this. There's more to it. You've got to look into the commentary of the arguments as well, which is what I've done. And basically the contingency arguments revolves around this concept that some things, not really some things, they think one thing is necessary, all other things are contingent, they're not necessary, they could plausibly not exist. So Craig would say, for instance, I think he actually does refer to a pen, I don't want to use this, grab a cheap pen. Craig would say, for instance, that this pen that I'm holding is contingent, because you can imagine a world, it's not necessary, it's contingent. You can imagine a universe in which this pen does not exist. So that's probably the first problem, is that why are we talking about imaginary universes? We've got a universe, let's talk about this one. There's a whole lot more to do with that, this is very great. Another problem with that is that, can you really imagine the universe without this pen existing? Is this pen not a part of the universe? Is it? Is it a part of the world that we live in? Is it a part of the universe? How can the universe not exist without this pen? It is actually a part of the universe. It's a necessary entity. So Craig obviously wants to argue that God is necessary. I'm arguing that this pen is necessary. If this pen were not in my hand right now, the universe would not exist, which is a freaky thought. I really don't want to drop this pen right now. Does someone want to dare me to drop the pen? Right? Okay, check it out. Let's see what happens. Okay, nothing happened. Alright. Why didn't the world just end then?
God recreated the universe.
But assuming this pen is necessary, and it was necessary that I was holding the pen, why didn't the universe end?
Because you made that pen. I mean, you can make another one.
Well, one idea, one theory is determinism. That the future is basically already set. And this alludes to a Christian doctrine as well of predeterminism. Some of you might be familiar with some verses in the Bible that indicate that the names are already written in the book of life. It's kind of like, well, what's the point? If it's already sorted who's saved and who's not saved. But there's a scientific equivalent of that, or a philosophical equivalent called determinism, which might basically argue for the same thing. Now, if it was necessary that I held the pen at that point, it was also necessary that I dropped it at the exact moment that I dropped it. That's why nothing happened. That was necessary too. And there's a philosophical principle that underlies this argument and the next one, the cosmological argument, called the principle of sufficient reason. Now, putting it in simple terms, this principle basically says that there's a reason for everything. And then Craig moves on to the whole concept of, well, there's necessary things, there's contingent things. Now, one consequence of the principle of sufficient reason, if you take it to its natural conclusion, is that everything is necessary. And there's a lot of philosophical stuff behind this, but we can move on from that. How are we going for time, by the way?
Good.
We're good?
I'll tell you when you know.
Okay. Alright, so if we move on to premise 2, well, some of you, I know Morgan was, did a lot of you attend the Krauss-Craig debate at Town Hall? You were there? Yep. He played around with premise 2, and I was in the line waiting for Krauss to sign my Craig books, and just for fun. And I heard atheists all around me saying, wow, Craig was really convincing when it came to his talk about premise 2. And premise 2 is, if the universe has an explanation of its existence, that explanation is God. Why would an atheist find that convincing? Because Craig basically explained that the typical atheist asserts that the universe, if atheism is true, the universe has no explanation. Now, I have a lot of problems with this. I don't care what Craig thinks atheism is. I don't care what Craig thinks the typical atheist would say. We're talking about proof. We're not talking about what certain groups may or may not think. That is a big problem there. Craig does the exact same thing when it comes to illusions of pantheism. I'm a big fan of pantheism. Pantheism is an alternative view to monotheism. When I say I'm a fan of it, I'm not saying I believe it. But pantheism is the view that God and the universe are the same. Now, you can take that in many different directions. The universe is divine, or the universe is completely natural. You can be a naturalistic pantheist, in which case you don't believe in anything supernatural necessarily. This is a problem for theists. This is a problem for people that come up with these sort of arguments, and we'll see why later. But Craig says some clever atheists might say, well, maybe the universe is necessary. If we're claiming that God's necessary, maybe the universe is necessary. Craig again says, but this would be a radical move for atheists because that alludes to the universe being a God substitute. Once again, who cares what Craig thinks is a radical move for atheists? Atheism is not an assertion that there is no God. It's up to Craig to actually prove his position. So there's a few problems with that second premise, and we've probably done enough with that arguments. Maybe one of the more boring arguments, we should move on a little bit. Okay, this is the argument that Craig's most famous for, the Kalam cosmological argument. He's taken a Muslim argument from centuries ago and modernized it a bit. And that is basically only two premises, really short. Whatever begins to exist has a cause. Again, it seems that this is influenced by the principle of sufficient reason. Premise 2, the universe began to exist. Conclusion, therefore the universe has a cause. Now that's a very logical argument. If the premises are true, it's watertight. But are the premises true? Does anyone see any problems with these premises? You have a problem with it?
Well, let's presume.
No.
Even if that was true, it doesn't mean that the cause is God. In general.
That's true. So you've pointed out a big problem with the conclusion. It's very benign. It's not even arguing for God.
It also argues that there is a time that it pre-exists the universe in a way for there to be a cause and effect process.
Yeah. Some philosophers discuss that issue as well, and this all revolves around what theory of time you take, and Craig basically admits that. What if you go for an alternative view of time, and the argument doesn't work?
Cause, I mean, what does cause mean? Is there intent, or is there an explanation?
That's right, there's what exactly is a cause. Another thing maybe, did you have an objection as well?
Oh, yeah, premise 1 and 2
Well, one problem as well is what's the universe? And did the universe begin to exist? There's at least two problems in that premise. Do we know that the universe began to exist? Before that we knew about the Big Bang. Christians obviously wouldn't be arguing this with scientific support. Craig uses the Big Bang as evidence that the universe began to exist. And then he retreats a little bit if you say, well, maybe this is only a localized scenario. What if there's a multiverse, which plenty of cosmologists talk about? But then he says, oh, well, this applies to the multiverse as well. So that's a bit, I don't like that. That's not really on.
As far as we look at the Big Bang, so far the theory basically says at the very beginning there's not even space-time structure. Forget about exists or not exists. It's only after the prime time then the space-time structure appear, and everything is still perfect isotropic and everything. And then it goes down, Higgs boson, etc., etc. So
on the Big Bang, some of you may have read Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, where Krauss kind of describes how a universe can come from nothing. Craig points out, rightly, this is one of the things he gets right, is that nothing isn't really nothing. Okay, there's potentiality there. When the theologian talks about nothing, they mean nothing. No energy, no matter, no potentiality, absolutely nothing. There's just one problem with that idea of nothing.
But their idea doesn't have no God in it.
This is an interesting concept that I bring up in my research, is that if in the very beginning there is nothing and there is God, God seems to have a boundary. God seems to be limited in some way. which is a problem that we can raise in another argument that's coming up. But basically, there's no proof that the theological type of nothing exists or has ever existed. There is proof for the Krauss type of nothing, the physicist type of nothing. There's no proof for the existence of absolute nothing. But of course, people like Craig take that idea of creation ex nihilo, creation out of nothing, and run with it, as if that's the normal position, that first there's nothing and then something comes out of nothing. We don't know. We really don't know. We don't know if the universe or whatever preceded the universe, if something preceded the universe is eternal or not. Obviously, the believer wants to think that God is eternal. Why this can't apply to the universe or some sort of pre-existing material that came before the universe, I have no idea. But as you pointed out, the conclusion is very benign. It's in the commentary of this argument that Craig actually brings up the idea of God. And he says the only sorts of things that could cause the universe, because the universe includes everything physical, it has to be something that's non-physical, such as abstract concepts like numbers or unembodied minds. Now there's a problem there. There's a lot of question begging going on. Physical and non-physical. Is that real? Have we established that? I don't think so.
I mean, what is the substrate for non-physical mind?
That's the other issue.
Yeah.
The mind exists now, does it? I didn't read that journal article that said, yeah, the mind is a thing that really exists. And I missed the follow-up journal article that says unembodied minds can exist. I thought that minds were always, if they exist at all, were attached to a body. Suddenly there's this concept of unembodied minds that Craig introduces, and now we've got great proof of God. So, yeah, when you really get into it, it's not all that convincing. There's better arguments to come. And the design argument, you may have heard this one a lot of different ways. How could the world just look the way it is and just be perfect for life? That's crazy. It must be God behind it. That's of course an appeal to ignorance. We don't know. It doesn't mean that this theory wins. Actually, Craig's version is sort of a sophisticated version of that line of thinking. Because, I'll just read the argument for you, for those who can't see the screen. The design argument's only got two premises. One, the fine-tuning of the universe is due to either physical necessity, chance, or design. So Craig gives three options. I generally don't have too much problem with that. I think that pretty much accurately says it. Three main possibilities of how the universe could look so fine-tuned. Physical necessity, it had to be that way. Or chance, just randomly happened. Or design, indicating a design, a goal. Craig then says, it's not due to physical necessity or chance, so design wins. Great stuff. Well, of course there's a lot more commentary here. The problem is, Craig points to the physical necessity and chance theories. He points to them as having no evidence. When it comes to design, he presents absolutely zero evidence. So the whole argument seems very arbitrary. If you would put design right at the front, you could then say premise two, okay, it's not due to design or physical necessity, it must be chance. It's very arbitrary that way. It's a negative argument. There's no positive proof of design, which means that he has to really rule out the other options, which he hasn't adequately done. One problem I have with his discussion of this argument is that to rule out physical necessity, you would have to point out the existence of other universes that aren't fine-tuned for life. And of course, we don't currently have the ability to do that, so Craig can't do that. He can't show us really why physical necessity isn't the way to go. Victor Stengen's got a pretty good book, God the Failed Hypothesis, that talks about all the various parameters of the universe. And this is what some theologians find so convincing. Why are all the parameters just so finely tuned for life? If you changed it just a fraction, the world would end. Well, Victor Stenger shows that a lot of these, maybe all these numbers could reduce to about 6 numbers, and maybe in future we'll find out that these numbers could reduce to 1, which would indicate that the universe as is physically necessary. But the only way to show that the universe is not physically necessary is to point to other universes that aren't fine-tuned for life. Now, doing that actually supports the chance hypothesis. If you're pointing to all these other universes where it just didn't work out, that supports the chance hypothesis. One out of so many universes just happened to work out.
This is exactly where Bayes' theorem starts.
Some very sophisticated atheistic philosophers actually apply Bayesian reasoning to this argument and actually use it against God's existence. Fine-tuning, if you really think about it, is an argument against God's existence. Alaric.
I find the whole premises for fine-tuning arguments. I mean, Euclidean geometry fine-tunes the triangles. Life's important to us, but it's important to the universe.
That's right. It's like the sentient puddle. Puddle thinks, wow, I just fit perfectly in this whole puddle of water. And then one day it all ends, the puddle dries up, just emptiness.
Doesn't the Higgs boson, now that we know, gives this amount of mass?
Oh yeah, well there's plenty of exciting stuff going on there.
In places it doesn't give that mass.
Maybe, exactly. Now, getting back to how this actually can be an argument against God's existence, you have to look at the argument from a different perspective. The thing is, we are not sitting in an epistemological void. We know this universe exists. We're not sitting outside the universe with infinite time, just watching what happens. Okay, there's the universe. Yep, there's another one. Yep, there's one. Oh, that's got right. Cool. We're not doing that. We're actually in the universe that exists, and it does exist. So the best way to approach the issue of fine-tuning is to find out what's the best explanation for that. Is it that God did it? Did God do the fine-tuning, or did it happen naturally? And the funny thing is, if God did not fine-tune the universe, if it just happened, then this is exactly the sort of universe we'd expect to see. Without fine-tuning, it wouldn't be alive. So our existence and fine-tuning without God, right, that evidence and that theory fit together 100%. You would definitely expect fine-tuning if God doesn't exist. If God does exist, would you expect that the relation between the theory of God's existence and our existence is 100%? Is that necessarily 100%? Would we need to see fine-tuning? Would fine-tuning need to happen if God exists for us to exist? Probably not, right? And that idea is biblically based. If some of you might be aware of the story of Daniel and the lion's den, Daniel had a few friends who were thrown in the fire. God protected them. That environment was not fine-tuned for the existence of human life. But because of God's awesome power, He was able to allow humans to live in a part of the universe that wasn't fine-tuned for life. So I don't know what the percentage is, whether it's 99.99% or 80%, but the relation between the evidence and the theory when it comes to God and fine-tuning cannot be 100%. To say that is blasphemy. So in that sense, it seems to favour, fine-tuning seems to favour a view of the universe without God. Question?
No, further to that, it's God fine-tune the universe, and that assumes that the laws of physics are more powerful than God, and we have to fine-tune them. When the laws of physics are the ultimate reality, not God. If we had to fiddle with them and fine-tune them.
Are you maybe alluding to that God is limited in some way? Yeah, that's an interesting area of research. The whole concept that God has limitations.
And if there was a design based on fine-tuning, why did He bypass it all and just make people have dirt anyway?
Exactly. Yeah, there's a lot of ways.
I mean, why do we have eternal organs? I mean,
evolution is pretty much accepted by Christians now. Why did we need to go through these millions and billions of years of evolution? It's such a cruel process.
Well, but the
why
problem
couldn't
is,
God just, I dream a genie style, bang, we're here?
The problem is that while the Catholic Church publicly supports evolution, it's its own version of evolution, which basically has God like Maxwell's demon working away furiously everywhere, making decisions.
Sure.
So it's kind of it's a make-believe kind of evolution. Yes.
One thing I want to say is that everyone keeps saying God is as a he, and God is, if you look at the dictionary, God is a superior being.
Mm-hmm.
So it's an energy, it's a being. So I don't know why people keep saying he done this and he done that.
You're exactly right. The concept that God has a penis is ridiculous.
It's an energy.
It's a big penis.
Anything that's capricious has got to be a T.
That's an energy that's
That might be contentious.
Okay, moving on a little bit.
And I'm not sexist.
So Craig's got another interesting argument. It's the argument from morality. You read it out. Two premises again. A lot of these arguments are very simple too. That's part of their power. One, if God does not exist, objective moral values and duties do not exist. A lot of people already shaking their heads. Two, objective moral values and duties do exist. Therefore, God exists. Anyone have any problems with this argument? One at a time.
He's just appealing to the consequences. Whether or not there are objective morals has no impact on the existence of God. It's a bit like saying.
Right, yeah. I think there's room for these new theologians to be a bit more transparent. I don't think they should call it objective moral values and duties. I think they should call it God-given moral values and duties. Because it's basically what they're arguing. Excuse me?
Moral is not even objective. Because
Right.
moral
So that's a problem as well. That's a problem as well. Do we have objective moral values and duties? Do we know that? We actually don't. Craig was embarrassed. This was one point where Craig was really embarrassed by philosopher Arif Ahmed at Cambridge University, because Ahmed, one of the few atheists that really exposed Craig's issues. He said, well, what was Craig's evidence for the existence of objective moral values? It was striking, so I'll repeat it for you. Basically, the evidence for the existence of objective moral values is, get ready, deep down, we all know it's true. That's the big evidence for the existence of objective moral values. Arif Ahmed cleverly goes on to say that may be considered an argument at Talbot Theological Seminary. It may even be considered an argument at the White House when Bush was in power. But this is Cambridge, and that's not an argument here. The normally typically reserved Cambridge crowd went wild. That was supposed to be good. But of course, I read through all of Craig's works, and I find there's a bit more to it. He comes up with this concept of moral experience. So we know that objective moral values actually exist because of our moral experience. And I thought, well, that's interesting. Maybe this isn't a circular argument. Maybe this isn't, sort of a question-begging argument after all. Where does the moral experience come from? Turn the page. God gives us the moral experience. So you've got God, who gives us the moral experience, which lets us know that objective morals exist, which shows us that God exists, right? So it goes like this. So what sort of a shape is that?
But surely in any case moral experience is subjective. Is a subjective experience.
Yeah.
I mean, it's experience is subjective, not objective.
Excuse me?
What's the sociopath? They have no morals.
So, as you can see, it's a pretty circular argument.
Does he make the distinction between morals and ethics?
He makes a distinction between morals and duties, moral values and duties. I don't think that's a good thing to do. I think we can just talk about one simple objective moral standard. Make it a bit simpler, but as you can see, it's not very convincing.
Morals come with experience. The more experience you have, you know what's right and what's wrong. If you haven't got experience, that's why you have to learn morals from something else, like the Bible.
People's moral values can change. They tend to be very subjective. It's very difficult to say there is an objective morality. Funnily enough, some atheists are sucked into this because some people do think, who aren't religious, that there are objective standards of morality, but really this is an issue that hasn't been sorted. We don't know that's the case. But moving on.
That implies that the universe has morality built into it. If it's objective.
That's right, yeah.
Which is preposterous.
Sometimes doesn't seem that way. It seems like the universe is fine-tuned for death most of the time. Okay, ontological argument. I don't want to be rude to Craig. I've met him. I like him. I think he's a pretty nice guy. I know he argues for genocide in the Bible, but generally he's a nice guy. This argument is the best of his arguments. It's not his argument. That's why I'm not trying to be nasty, but this is planting his argument. It's the best of the philosophical arguments. It's the best. It's the most. Look how big it is. It's the most relevant as well. You might notice that all the other arguments don't necessarily argue for God. This argument argues for God. We're talking about a maximally great being, a being that's all-powerful, all-good, all-knowing. Now, I think even most atheists can agree, yeah, if a being like that exists, I'd be happy to call that God. That pretty much seems to be like a God-like figure. Now, I guess I should read out the argument. First premise, it is possible that a maximally great being exists. If it is possible that a maximally great being exists, we can just replace that with God. If it's possible that God exists, then God exists in some possible world. If God exists in some possible world, then God exists in every possible world, because God is maximally great. If God exists in every possible world, God exists in the actual world. If God exists in the actual world, then God exists, so therefore God exists. Now, it may sound surprising, but generally from premise 2 onwards, it's pretty solid. It can be a bit confusing, the concept of other worlds, because it seems we're just using our imagination here. But generally, philosophers don't have too much trouble with that. All the problems lie in this first premise. Does anyone know what the problem is there?
It makes their own problem.
Excuse me?
It's a problem about the maximally great.
Yeah, that could be a problem in the sense that, I don't know, it seems kind of arbitrary that religious people get to define God, who they haven't proven exists yet, as being a being that is maximally powerful, maximally knowledgeable. I would argue, well, there's other attributes I would want to add to that. As someone that enjoys pantheism, I would say, okay, maybe you can say God is omnibenevolent, omnipotent. Maybe you can say God is omniscient, which means that God is everywhere. So now you've got a pantheistic God. That's a big problem to the typical monotheistic believer. The real problem here is in saying that it's possible that God exists. That's the real problem. And the funny thing is, Alvin Plantinga, the guy that actually created this argument, he admits that. He admits the problem with this argument, and he admits that it's not a proof of God. Craig kind of admits it too. Craig then goes on to say, but we've got these other arguments that suggest maybe God does exist. He tries to shift the burden of proof as well by saying, can we atheists show that it's not possible for God to exist? That's obviously shifting the burden of proof. Forget what we think. It's up to him. He's got to justify his position. But the problem is that it is and it isn't. God's existence is possible and it's not possible at the same time. There's a confusion here between epistemic possibility and actual or metaphysical possibility. Epistemic possibility refers to our knowledge. We don't know God exists, so according to our knowledge, it could be God exists, could be true or could be false. Could be in the yes column, could be in the no column. But our ignorance on the matter doesn't mean that God actually is possible. That's a different kind of possibility. When it comes to actual possibility, metaphysical possibility, can such a being really exist? We don't know. So that's very much begging the question. Moving it on, because we don't have much time. I'm sure you enjoy this one. This is the personal experience argument. You can experience God personally. This isn't really an argument for God's existence. Rather, it's the claim that you can know that God exists wholly apart from arguments simply by immediately experiencing Him. Don't think we need to talk about that too much. It's not really an argument. And there's plenty of explanations for why Craig might feel that way. There's of course this problem of other religions as well. There are people in other religions that feel the same way about their God. Okay, now what I find so interesting, that the bulk of these arguments, what do they actually prove if they worked? They don't work. I don't concede that any of them are sound. But what do they actually prove? We might have a necessary being, maybe. We might have a localized cause for the universe. There might be a designer, there might be a moral lawgiver, there could be a maximally great entity, and personal experience is a totally invalid argument. So how does this actually prove the existence of Yahweh, the Judeo-Christian God? There's nothing there. At best, this proves a generic God. To other people, it proves another God. For some of the people in this room, this is the God we're talking about. The good old times forgetting my stuff. So, I make the case that most of these arguments are actually kind of irrelevant, because we're not here to discuss some generic God. And there's even different concepts of God as well. Like I alluded to pantheism, there's deism. In those concepts, religion looks very, very different to the typical Christian and Muslim view of God, where God actually cares about what you do. Now, everything comes back to Jesus, basically. So Craig kind of admits that too, that all those other arguments, they really only get you to generic God. You need to move on to Jesus to try and prove the Christian God. But yeah, in my work, if you read the book, I slam that argument. We probably don't have much time to go through it here, but the basic idea is that Craig uses a bunch of facts that aren't really facts. As I said, he sourced them from fictional documents. And he puts forward an explanation that God raised Jesus from the dead. It is a supernatural explanation. It's inherently implausible, and I argue and defend that view that miraculous explanations are implausible. And there are actually more naturalistic hypotheses, such as the total fabrication hypothesis. It's all made up. That's a very unpopular view within academia, but it's more plausible than his supernatural magical theory. And there's plenty more plausible ideas as well. So, I even raised the point that if Jesus was resurrected from the dead, it still doesn't necessitate that the God of Christianity is the one true God. It could have been Baal that rose Jesus from the dead. It could have been an alternative God. It could have been a freak of nature, something that's very rare that we just don't know about. There's a lot more explanations. Showing that Jesus was resurrected doesn't necessarily show that, okay, Christianity is the one true faith. Everyone else is wrong. Okay, so that's pretty cute. That's a school of fish. Alright, so we talk about all these sort of issues in the book, also about the alternative God conceptions. We talk about how basically God is proven through philosophical means, historical means, scientific means. It basically all reduces down to empirical evidence. Anyway, we'll go through that more in the book. And yeah, science is awesome. Empiricism is awesome. I defend that in the book. Do you know who this guy is? Jesse Pinkman? Yeah? Magnets! Okay, everything comes down to empiricism in the end, even when you're talking history, when you're talking philosophy. I like to say when it comes to history that we can only look at the past through the lens crafted in today's empiricism. We take what we know of the world right now and apply that to the past, and then we make probabilistic determinations about what maybe happened. And right, I tacked this on the end. It's in an article you can read on my website. I thought it would be a cool little appendix for the book because the book's all about the evidence, and I don't make any commentary. But I thought let's have a little article that explains something about faith. I basically make the argument that because people don't have evidence for any particular religion, it really should be tolerant towards other people's religions, and of course those of us that don't hold religious views. And yeah, there it is. Since we don't have any proof for the truth, and specifically the exclusive truth of any religious tradition, let the gays get married. Why not? If you like the cut of my jib, check out my websites, raphaellataster.com, pantheismunites.com. Also, the book has a Facebook page. Please like it and share it. You can grab a copy on Amazon Kindle. It's like $2.99. And Jess, my lovely assistant Jess, has copies of the book available for $10. Signed as well. And that's it. The end. Thank you.
Questions?
Yeah, plenty of questions.
I've got a question about your last comment about faith. You beat me to it because my question is going to be, what do you say to academics in universities, that come up with the same argument, who are religious, and they just say it's not about science or evidence, it's about faith? And
Sure. I urge you to check out my little article there. It's only a few paragraphs. Basically, I say I don't have a problem with someone believing on faith. I mean, it doesn't make sense to believe because of the evidence, because the evidence is no good. That's not a good way to go about it. But I have no problem with someone having religious views based on faith on one condition. They need to have humility. They need to realize that, well, there's all these other people that also believe their religion is based on faith, and there's all these other people that have other views that aren't religious or supernatural. So they basically just need to not have that arrogant attitude that they hold exclusive truths. If you're gonna assert that, if you're gonna live your life that way, then you need to refer to the evidence. So it's a good question. It's a good topic to deal with. But that's basically it. I think it's okay to have faith, but if you're going to claim that as the exclusive truth, you do need evidence.
Don't you have to be pretty ignorant to have faith?
No, not necessarily.
I was just saying an observation that typically the expression of that sort of humility tends to be when they start expressing ecumenical views as a response to the atheists, in which case it's kind of a, well, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, until we stop talking about the atheists and all of a sudden everything they think is rubbish.
Yeah, exactly. It's funny how the Muslim and the Christian both think the cosmological argument is fantastic until the Christian says it's the Christian God. Then they start disagreeing. But that's exactly right. Alaric?
Just with the objective moral values thing.
Yeah.
How can you say that that's what God's all about? When God's ultimate judgment is all about whether or not you believe in Him without any evidence. Not about nothing about anything you've done, nothing about that's his only criteria.
And there's a problem with predeterminism as well.
There's nothing moral about that.
Yeah, that's a good point, and it probably doesn't do much to argue against subjective morals though, but it does allude to that faith issue again. And the Bible does seem to support the belief based on faith, but again, if you're going to go that way, you probably shouldn't be so hardcore about your beliefs, so exclusivist about it. Any other questions?